Hi everyone and welcome to the Desteni I Process live Google Hangout. We host Hangouts here from the Desteni I Process channel on YouTube every Thursday, and we're actually starting with a new series of Hangouts from today. And the topic is going to be studying and education, because we know and have experienced for ourselves that both studying and being in the education system can be kind of a traumatic experience, and there is a lot of baggage that comes from our school experiences that we then take with us into adulthood. And so what we will be talking about today is this point of how we carry struggles and traumas with us from our educational experience with us into our life, and then how we can actually utilize the Desteni tools and the Desteni I process to assist and support ourselves so that we can be the directive principle and the driving force of our educational process. And to discuss this point, I have invited two gentlemen here with me today, one of which is my partner in crime, Victor. And my name is Anna Briggs Thompson, and we're located here in Sweden. And on the other side of the world, we have Cameron with us from Houston in the US. Hi, Cameron.
Hi, glad to be here.
Very cool that you're here. So I would say that having talked to you guys, both of you, you've been quite successful in going through the education system. Victor, you're finishing up your degree in law. You'll be done in the summer. And Cameron, you've been studying, amongst other things, advanced maths for a number of years, correct?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I'm having so much trouble pronouncing. I'm not a native English speaker, so I'm having trouble with the word maths. So
well, in the U.S. we say math. We don't put the S, so if that helps at all.
Really?
Yeah, that's
nice. Okay.
That's a whole other discussion.
So I find it really cool to be talking to you guys, both from the perspective that you have actually had success in your own life with going through the education system, but to also then go back to the early years. And before we do that, I just want to remind our viewers that you can actually participate in this discussion. You can place your questions for Cameron and Victor and for me on our Google Plus page, or if you have any comments to the discussion that we'll be having today. If you're watching this live from YouTube, you have to click where it says be part of the conversation. That will take you to our Google Plus page, and there you can then type in any question or comment that you have. We'll be talking for about 40 minutes, so make sure that you get your question on your your comment in during that time frame. You can also watch this hangout later on demand. So if you do have a comment or a question afterwards, after the live broadcast, you can add it on our YouTube, the video section of the comment section of our YouTube video. All right, so let's get started. I'd like to start, if you guys could give us some examples of how you experienced yourself or seen struggles during your process of going through the education system. Anything that you, for example, as a child or as a small child, that you find that you struggled with, or that you found affected you on quite a deep level, something that affected you also into adulthood. You want to start, Victor?
Yeah, I would say that one of the more prevalent points that affected me was not so much schoolwork, even though I didn't like that particularly, but it was first and foremost the entire social point of going to school, because school is an institution that is created mostly to sort of enable the female in a family to go to work. So it doesn't take so much the actual child into consideration. It's more like a daycare.
You mean preschool?
No, I mean the entire school system.
Okay.
Is basically, just to enable the woman in the family to work as well. So it's like, well, what I want to get at is that the entire system, it's not for actual education. It's just you throw lots of children together from various backgrounds together in one big mishmash and that creates massive consequences. And particularly for me, I was this, you know, introverted, quite shy person, and due to that, I was often prone to being bullied, for example. And so this environment was very like cold. It was more a point of, you know, going to school each day to survive, to sort of get through it all, to say the right things, to be cool, and having no form of tools to support myself in that, to sort of stabilize myself, made the entire school experience, you know, very tough. And I can see that I would have had a much better education if I could have been at home with my family, for example, and being homeschooled.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've also shared previously how going to preschool and that first point of having to go to preschool was quite a traumatic experience for you, because you were actually quite content, and then you were thrown in with all these kids like lions in a cage almost.
Yeah.
But it's interesting what you started with saying about studying, you know, where you said that, of course, I didn't like that. And I find that quite interesting, that it's something that we take for granted. Like, well, of course no one likes studying. Like, that's just how it is. And I'm not so sure it has to be that way. But we can talk more about that later. So how about for you, Cameron? What was the prominent struggles or difficult experiences that you had growing up and going to school?
Well, two things come up for me when you ask that question. One of them, I can totally relate to what Victor's saying in terms of school, especially in the younger years, in terms of my memories and everything, being more about the social aspect. And it's funny, when I look back through my memories as a young child, especially, you know, primary school and what we call middle school here in the U.S., so up to about 8th grade, most of my memories primarily are not about what I was actually learning, but more about, you know, how I interacted with my teachers, getting in trouble, or, you know, kind of the social dynamics of the school and classroom environment. So that really stands out to me, and I can definitely relate to Victor's point about it. You know, looking at the whole classroom and the school system and everything, it's not really completely well designed in terms of considering, you know, what's the best environment for a child to learn, and especially when you have lots of different children with different backgrounds and different families, environments, and all of that. So that was I mean, there's so many things within that. But another thing, kind of from a different angle, that really affected me as a young student was, I don't know if they have this in Sweden or, for example, in Denmark, where you grew up, Anna, but we have something in the U.S. called Gifted and Talented, and in different states it's called different things, but there's usually in a lot of schools anyways some kind of gifted program.
No, we don't have that.
You don't have that?
No, they've started with it slowly now. We're usually
Okay.
10, 20 years behind the U.S. here, and then it starts.
Okay.
True.
So maybe in the future, yeah. Well, just to kind of give you briefly an idea of what it is, basically there was a day, and I was in this program up through about 8th grade, so not in high school, but pretty much from kindergarten and up through middle school. And what it was is we'd have a period of our day where I was in a classroom with, you know, 25 or so other kids, and then a certain period of our day they would take some of us, maybe about 5 or 10 of us, depending on what grade I was in, and we would go to another class with a different teacher, and it would be like what they called the Gifted and Talented program. And it was interesting because the types of activities and things we did were very fun. It was designed to engage our creativity. It was always a time I looked forward to. But just having that label, and I mean at the time I didn't really understand what it was or what was the purpose of it, but, you know, being told you're gifted and talented, I kind of accepted that as a definition of myself, like, oh, I must be smart or somehow better than these other kids in my class. And I could definitely feel, and I could see it from the other students as well, that it was almost like a class distinction. Do you know what I mean? Like in terms of when you look at economics and things like that, like you have the kids who are in the regular classes and the kids in the gifted classes. And that really stuck with me, and I accepted that as part of my self-definition in terms of I'm very gifted And so what that translated into as I got older, especially when I entered high school, and just so you know, from up until 8th grade, I went to a public school here in the U.S., and then when I entered high school, I went to a fairly competitive private school in Houston.
That must have been a shock for you, hey?
It definitely was, because accepting that self-definition of being gifted and all of that towards school, what that meant to me was I don't really have to do anything. Like, it comes naturally to me. I'm gifted, right? So I had not developed any kind of habits really towards studying. I spent most of my time in class just trying not to be bored, basically, and just listening. And so when I would take tests or that type of thing, it wasn't really from a disciplined approach of preparing for them. It was just what I remembered in class. And I had, I guess, in terms of what they require in school, a pretty good memory. So I could remember things that I was told. So, when I'm taking my tests and so forth, it wasn't so much about did I really understand what I was doing, but more did I remember the correct answers or things like that from what I'd been told. So that had a pretty big effect, and I didn't do poorly in high school, but I had not, especially in high school, had that sense of self-discipline. So if something came easy for me, then I generally did well. If it was a course where I didn't really have a lot of interest, then I wouldn't do that well. And it wasn't until much later in university where I really had to sit and develop the self-discipline skills to actually learn how to study and so forth. So that had a pretty profound effect on me in school.
It's interesting because I actually had the exact same, or you could say the exact same consequence happen to me, but from the opposite perspective, in terms of not being gifted. And this was specifically related to math, which is interesting that I then now have trouble pronouncing the word math, which is then actually not the word. But anyways, so this came from my mother emphasizing, she's done that my entire life, that she's not good at math. And I remember her told me several times that it's probably genetic. I have this deficit and I've probably transferred it to you. I'm so sorry. So I went into the process of learning math already thinking that I was disabled. And shit, this is going to be a problem for me. This is going to be difficult. And then in the process of learning math, I was completely stunned. And I had already started, like you're saying, I had already started accepting this identity for myself. And but then also in that, then having difficulties, whether they were prompted or whether they were real. What I experienced was that it was moving so fast. The process of learning math was moving so fast that I couldn't keep up. Like, I was in dire need of someone really sitting down with me and taking it slow, but without making it a big deal, but simply, okay, let me show you another time, or let me show you one more time. And because that didn't happen, I got more and more and more behind, which eventually led me to give up. Like, at some point, the other kids in my class, it had gotten so advanced that I couldn't even understand what the teacher was saying. It was like they were speaking in a foreign language. And so, based on my the way that I dealt with it within my mind, I just gave up. I was like, okay, but then I won't learn math. I will never learn math. And it's something that I later on really regretted, because I do see in certain areas of my life or certain things that I have to handle that it does require a level of math that I haven't developed, and so it's something that I then have to take on as an adult. But it would have been, it would have been very cool to have learned all of that basic math while I was in school. And then also in relation to what you were saying with that point of thinking that you're gifted, and then kind of just memorizing everything. That's something that I can also relate to a lot in other subjects besides math, where I was quick and I got the information quickly. And at some point I learned that in a way the teachers, especially when you get to doing tests and exams, they don't really care about whether you have actually learned and understand the information. They need you to present it as though you have. And so I figured out that I could basically fake my way through it. I could speak so well or write so well that it would sound like I knew what I was talking about. And then, you know, I would get a good grade and I would think, hey, this is working perfect. I've cracked the code. But I didn't learn anything. And exactly as you said, it was only when I got into university that excuse my French, the shit hit the fan in terms of this time I couldn't fake it. This time I had to actually learn the material. But it astounds me that you have to go to university before it gets real. And what I've seen also in working as a teacher is that the kids experience education as though it's like a simulation, as though it's not real. You just have to show to the teachers so that they're satisfied, so that they, you know, have done their job probably, but no one really cares that you actually learn. Is that something that you guys have experienced as well?
Yeah, you know, obviously I would be careful about generalizing in terms of, I would say it's not so much that the teachers don't care, although I'm sure there are teachers who, you know, it's a job for them and they may or may not, but I know there are also a lot of teachers who are passionate, like yourself, for example. But when a teacher is placed in a situation where they don't feel empowered or they don't really see a practical way to support children, you know, especially from the perspective that you have so many different children with different levels of ability to integrate certain types of information. Because of their family background or their environment or all types of things. There's a lot of factors that go into that, obviously. But when you have 25 or 30 kids in a classroom, and like you were talking about in your experience, maybe just needing a little bit more explanation on something, I mean, how can the teacher really provide that for that many students? And so that whole structure and system in itself, I think, can be very frustrating for a teacher. And I know here in the U.S., there's a very high turnover rate for new teachers. So many teachers quit within the first few years.
Yeah, they do.
When I talk to them, they say, you know, it's not what I expected at all. Because when they're going through their education process, it's all about, you know, helping the children and you know, feeling good about that. And I think, you know, as a teacher, it makes sense to feel good about, it's an important thing, educating a child. But, you know, there's so much, if you want to call it bureaucracy and just systematic things that they have to deal with, where there's not a lot of room for a teacher to really have an impact that they want to have in a child's life. So I can see that would be very frustrating.
No, I absolutely agree with you. It's like they are equally trapped in the exact same system, you know, and they're worried about their survival and their own children. And
it's like it reinforces itself. Yeah.
What did you say?
It reinforces itself because obviously the teachers come through the same education system and then they go back into it. So, yeah, it's quite a challenge from that perspective.
Yeah, and I can also share as a teacher something that has really broken my heart. Also, especially as a new teacher, that I didn't know. And that's also what's so fascinating is that as adults, it's like we tend to suppress or forget about our own experiences growing up with going to school. It's almost like to some extent it's so traumatic that we don't even want to remember it. But something that I've experienced extensively is that it's really only the very young children, like they are so excited about going to school when they're 6 years old. It's just the best thing that's ever happened to them. And then slowly but surely you just see the light goes out of them. And then when they're, well, from fourth grade, whatever, whenever it hits, you could say, all they talk about is the tests and the exams, and very rarely hear children talking about subjects that they learned, or they learned about volcanoes or dinosaurs or the American presidents or whatever, with this curiosity and passion. And that's something that I would say is definitely missing. Is that something you've experienced, Victor?
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting to look at like the history of school. You know, where does it come from? And in fact, school, it's an institution that has been made and created to make people submissive. You know, it was first developed in the, I think, 17th century in order to make Prussian, children more suitable for military duty, you know, to make them to learn them how to obey orders. So that's sort of what we have, you know, the remnants of, and it has developed, and now we have, though, this like illusory idea of the school system that it should somehow teach children something of value, though that is not the actual purpose of the school system, you know. And also, for example, I know in the United States we have this guy, you know, what's it called?
John Taylor Gatto.
Yeah, John Taylor Gatto, and he's written these very cool books where he's done research into the, you know, the foundational documents of the American school, where he says that, okay, the states needed more laborers, so they created the schools to create these people that would be satisfied standing in a small room doing the same thing over and over again. So sort of, you know, suppressing that drive in people that we can see as children to sort of be expansive, be their own individual expression. So I wouldn't, you know, be so flabbergasted about this situation, because it's actually deliberate, even though we might not, most of us might not be aware of that point.
Well, so to illustrate that, or to bring that back to our personal processes, what that reminded me of was how we don't actually learn anything, or I did learn very little during my time in school about my own body, about feeling my own body or responding to my own body, like, you know, for example, hunger, or something different that could be emotions. I know that that's something that you also mentioned earlier, Victor, that in going into school and being an introverted person, that you didn't learn how to cope with what you were experiencing. So is that something you guys could share a little bit more on, how you experienced that growing up?
Yeah, so can you kind of clarify what you're looking at there, though, in terms of...
Well, I'm looking at, did you, like, can you share with us how you experienced the point of learning about yourself, you know? Did you learn about yourself? Did you learn about your own body in school, for example?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point to look at. I mean, my experience going through school, my experience was that really being in school wasn't so much about learning about myself. And I had never actually looked at it from that perspective before. The way I experienced it was that school was more about really just learning specific information, right? And almost without actually any explanation of why. So it's like I felt like being just put into something where I just had to be there. And I didn't really see it as, or experience it, and even now looking back on it, experience it as something that was really there to help me understand myself and the world around me. It's almost, I mean, if I could sum up my experience within school, especially as a young child, I felt it was very alienating, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Very artificial from a certain perspective, and mostly that experience I had was more about learning social interaction, really, but not from a directed starting point, just kind of being thrown into something and then kind of having to navigate your way. And I think that word coping is a pretty good word to use for that. You learn a lot of coping mechanisms when you're in school. You know, it's not directed in terms of looking at the totality of what it means to be a child or a human being and really supporting you to develop that. And I mean, even when you consider some of the things that you don't learn in school that you really need, like how to do your taxes, you know, or basic things like that, it kind of makes you wonder. And I think Victor makes a really good point in terms of, if you really look at the history of the education system and, you know, what we consider the public education system, especially as it is in the U.S., it really wasn't designed to be something that supports a human being to reach their full potential and to be a member of society that really is an equal. You know, it's not meant to be something that really empowers everybody. It was really designed for a very specific purpose. And the way I kind of look at it for myself is it's an obsolete technology, really. It's a system that's kind of it served a very useful purpose in the limited context of, you know, industry and economics and so forth. But I think that if we're going to really look at the challenges that we're facing in this world, and just within ourselves individually as humans, we're going to have to make changes to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and a really good example of that is something that I think most people I have met have experienced and still struggle with today as adults, which has to do with the point of asking questions and how, you know, so many of us have these memories of not asking questions in school or asking questions and then everyone laughs at you and the teacher doesn't direct it effectively and you end up feeling that all of this has on, exactly as I said, like with this point with being afraid of asking questions, that then you carry it with you as an adult. So what struggles have you experienced that you, through your Destiny process and through applying the Destiny tools for yourself, that you can see can be directly traced back to experiences from when you were in school? Did you, for example, experience this introvertedness and then being thrown into the school system and having to navigate it and not having the tools, that you carried that with you as an adult?
No, but I have another point that I actually brought with me, and it's because the school system has this interesting point that it sort of puts you in a place and it does everything for you for 15 years or something like that. So what happened to me was more that in those 15 years I sort of lost this insight or realization that, okay, I'm in fact the one creating my own life. So I would say that in a way the school system made me apathetic and sort of rely upon bureaucracy and governmental structures to create my life for me, and also relying upon the parental system to create my life for me. And it's interesting when we look at it because the school is this, you know, father figure that just takes responsibility, that tells you what value you have, what grade you get, it gives you food, gives you some form of purpose, and then when you get out of school, it's very easy to understand why a lot of people lack, you know, drive, lack any form of initiative. It's because they have been fed their entire lives and they have not, you know, that point of creativity that exists within everyone when we are young. You know, we go to school because we like it, we want it. That is, you know, gone. And that is a consequence, and I see that also saw for myself.
But now you have then turned this around completely. You've done a 180 on this problem or this apathy that you came out of school with through your participation in the Desteni I process or the process that you've walked. Yeah. So how did you do that? How did you turn it around?
I would say that I turned it around through understanding that I am responsible for my life and that it's only through my own volition that I can create value for myself and sort of make something out of the time I have here on earth. That to only wait for things to happen, it's somehow, you know, a lack of self-respect. You know, you're just waiting, you're throwing away yourself. So I guess that point of understanding and realization helped me to step out of that apathy and begin, you know, taking my own steps.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. How about you, Cameron? Have you seen any struggles or any traumas that you carried with you from your time in school and into adulthood that then had consequences in your life later on?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, going back to that point I mentioned about creating that definition of myself that things just come naturally to me, and then stepping into the whole university experience where the workload is a lot higher, and in terms of the schools that I went to, I really actually had to know what I was talking about. So I couldn't really do that whole faking process that we were discussing earlier. So what that meant was I actually had to develop that self-discipline point of sitting and actually reading and understanding and studying the material, which I had not developed through those, 12 plus years of school up until that point. And one of the most valuable tools I can say is the tool of being able to write out your experience within that, instead of just keeping it as something where you might have reactions and things like that to, let's say, what you're studying, or a resistance. Being able to actually place that out on paper or on your computer and see what you're actually participating in. And another aspect of that was not so much in terms of the studying, but in terms of this sort of competitive nature that I had developed within school, and always wanting to be get praise from the teacher or feeling competitive with the other students. That was something that I realized early on when I started writing these points out for myself and seeing, like when I would have a conflict with another student or with a teacher, instead of just accepting that and harboring it and letting that accumulate, I would actually write it out and see what I was participating in. And that was really helpful for me, especially in university, because it allowed me to stop participating in the kind of whole mental mind game thing that I was participating in school. Instead look at the actual practical things I needed to do, which practically was just study the information and be able to understand it and interact with my peers in a way that it would support all of us to become more effective and understand the information better. I mean, that's really how it should be. The other stuff is not necessary. Being competitive and feeling afraid of your teacher, and we talked about that point earlier about not wanting to ask questions. All of those kind of things that are really limiting beliefs and behavior patterns. Being able to write that out and realize that that's something I have accepted in the past, but I don't have to continue accepting that. And I remember there's this one experience that kind of stands out for me, where I was studying computer science, and it was a programming course in Java. And I didn't have a lot of background in computer science at that point, so it was very new to me from that perspective. But I remember there was one point I was reading the textbook, and I started getting really bored. Like, I wouldn't even say I was getting bored. I just started kind of drifting off when I was reading. And there was a certain point where I got like 3 pages, into the material, and I had no idea what I was reading. And I just had this kind of aha point of, why am I continuing reading if I'm not understanding, if I'm just drifting off? Like, what's the point of why I'm doing this? If I'm just going to sit here and read the material, am I doing it from myself in terms of I really am actually going to understand this, or am I just doing it because I'm supposed to? And that was a big shift for me, realizing how much I had accepted this point of kind of like an apathy towards school, and like Victor was talking about, having everything being directed for me. I mean, that was a large part of my experience being in school. It's like it's all done for you. It's just something you're there, and you have to get through it. But having that realization that no, and the decision that no, I want to do this for myself. So I'm going to have to develop some skills, and realizing that things are not going to change overnight. It is a process to redevelop those points and work with yourself and see like what the feedback you have within your experiences. But definitely writing those points out and being able to see what I'm participating in had a huge effect for me in school. Absolutely.
That actually, what you said reminded me of how something like homework, in terms of wanting to have credit from the teacher or just going with the motions. Mm-hmm. That's one of the most misused and misunderstood aspects of the school system. And as a teacher, I can say that I very rarely receive homework. Like, both the students, but even their parents, see the homework as something that they're doing for me as a teacher, but not even as a person, for them to then give approval to the child.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas from my perspective, homework should be you working with what you're learning about, and then you evaluating yourself, you seeing, okay, I got this far, I learned this I still have to practice, or getting that feedback from the teacher as someone who knows more about the subject than you do. But it's actually proven to be quite difficult to turn that way of looking at homework around, where it's not something that is seen as something that you do for yourself, but it's something you do for the teacher or to get somewhere. And then what also happens because of that is that it's done with what is that expression, like second hand? Not second hand, like you were saying, like where you're not really there with it. You're just going with the motions of it, but not actually going into the depth of the material or perfecting yourself within it, and really getting into it, because you just need to get it done and have it be good enough so that you can get your mark or your grade and then get on with it. And this is actually something that I've seen carry through into my Desteni I Process courses, where I also saw that I was, again, because in my mind, the fact that I'm doing a course is then equated to going to school. Mm-hmm. And the fact that I have to hand in the assignments, it then equates to there being a teacher and me doing homework, which is actually quite interesting in seeing how our minds make these instant connections, when it's in fact something completely different. I'm walking this course for myself, and it would be pointless to do it for someone to give me credit. And once I took, exactly like you were talking about, Victor, once I took self-directive responsibility for that, it completely changed. Like it became so much more substantial, and I learned so much more about myself, and it started becoming enjoyable instead of being something that I resisted and just had to get done because otherwise the teacher will get mad or whatever. So that's something that I find in many areas of our life that we can see. And this is something we can utilize the Desteni I process and the Desteni tools for, is when we find that we're struggling with something or that we're reacting to it, to look at, what is this reminding me of? Like, is there a pattern here that I'm repeating that's actually based on memories, for example, from when I was in school? And can I redefine this in such a way that it becomes expansive and something that I support myself through?
Absolutely.
So, do you guys want to add something to that?
Well, I can definitely relate to that point, because once I took once I had that shift within myself and actually started applying that point of, okay, I'm doing this for myself, that's when learning and studying can be really fun. And I had that same experience within school. Once I made that shift for myself, I also took the perspective within myself that I'm not going to be dependent on the teacher for me to learn. And that was a big point. And I think going back to what you were saying about the homework point and all of that, I do think that it's possible for a lot of parents to feel like, the teacher is there to teach my child information, and therefore it's kind of like your responsibility as a teacher, and not necessarily the child also has a responsibility within that to develop their own kind of self-direction within their learning process. And I mean, in terms of the school system itself, that's to a degree, a complicated point in itself. So that's obviously why we're looking at what can you do for yourself to support that point.
Yes.
But that was a major shift for me in school, when I took the point on of, I'm going to do this for myself, and then I wasn't doing, let's say, homework from the perspective of I'm just going to turn it in. It was more, and in fact, I really took the perspective of, I'm going to take my textbook, and even if there's certain chapters that aren't assigned, I'm just going to learn it, because obviously it's in here, it must be important, right? And I would work out all of the questions in the book. A lot of the textbooks here are structured in a way where it has text, where it explains, and then gives an example. And those are usually the things as a student that you just skip over. You're like, whatever. But they're actually very supportive because it actually helps you integrate the information as you're learning it. So once I took that point on of, okay, I'm not going to rely on the teacher. They're there as a support, and they have wisdom, and if I have questions, I can go to them. But what if the teacher was somebody who just didn't do anything, right? What would I do then? And you know, we didn't really talk about it a lot, but I have a lot of experience as a private tutor. I've done that for about 10 years, working with students in private schools as a private tutor in math and science. And one of the most interesting things, I was going to say frustrating, but that's really just something I accepted at the time. But one thing that was a challenge was working with a student where their attitude would be, if they didn't understand something or if they got a bad grade on their test, they would just say, oh, well, my teacher's just a bad teacher, right? And so that was an interesting process in itself to work with a student to, with varying degrees of success, get them to see that, or support them to see that they are at a certain level responsible for their own learning. And especially nowadays where there's so much information on the internet where, you know, if you want to understand how to factor a quadratic equation or something, you can look it up, right? And it's interesting to see, even with all of that out there, that child's experience going through school and their relationship towards the teacher and their parents and everything within that, even with the prevalence of all the information that's out there, a lot of students will still just say, well, my teacher should just teach me. You know, not even see that there's all this information out there that they could use to support themselves. So really, I think the solutions are not going to come from having access to lots of information. There has to be that point of self-responsibility and supporting children within that, because otherwise it's just the same process repeated that we went through as children as well. So.
Yeah, and I think we can go on about this for hours because I also see within that is, like I said before, when they are 5, 6 years old, they're super ambitious and super passionate. I have a first grade student that, you know, he said to me that he doesn't like to go to school, and when I asked him why, he said that it's because he's not allowed to read more. Like, he wants more homework. And whenever I'm there, he's like, can you give me more homework, you know? So I think that point is actually being stunned, like you were saying, Victor, that it's not being allowed to flourish. But anyway, that's a topic for a completely different discussion that we surely shall have someday. We're about to finish off here, and I really want to ask you guys about your tips and suggestions for anyone struggling with studying now or having this like baggage, mental baggage with them. What can they do? But before that, we have a comment here from Rep Dalmas. And she is saying, my father was a journalist in the school district I attended, and sometimes the bias as reactions to his articles crossed my path with my teachers in school. I ended up losing respect for the teacher because of this. So I'm sure that's something that others may relate to, but you know, you had a more direct experiences with it because it was your father and you actually knew the man and that there was bias between them. But that's also a whole nother kind of worm, which is what is actually being taught in schools and what is not being taught in schools. But we're running out of time. So we'll leave that for another time. Let's continue with your tips and your suggestions for what to do if you find yourself either struggling with school now, or if you find that you have this baggage from when you were in school. By the way, we will be doing more hangouts on this topic, so this is merely an introduction, and Victor will actually be coming back for an entire hangout on studying tips, so definitely don't miss that one. But any tips for this point?
Yeah, I would say that one of the points that I found helped me is to push myself to understand the material, because I realized that there is a very distinct difference between knowing the material and understanding the material. And I can give an example, and it's much like the example that Cameron gave. In the books that I study, we have these parts in the books which are made in small capitals, and that is the part where the author goes into these like quite complex and difficult aspects, and he goes into all these various reasoning that are quite difficult to follow. And usually what I did was like, well, I don't need to understand that because, you know, that won't come in the text anyway. But I found that, you know, when I go into that and I read it first and I'm like, I don't understand anything here. But then I can read it again, like, and then again. And in doing that and finally getting to the point of understanding it, there's like a point of satisfaction that, oh, I could really get myself to, you know, actually understand this part that I in the beginning thought was complex, difficult, I couldn't grasp it. So that is fun to sort of, you know, actually utilize the education to expand yourself and develop reasoning skills, for example.
And how about the other point, the point of, for example, being introverted and having trouble with this side of it? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, then I would say that school is a perfect place to get to know people of various backgrounds, and it's also, you know, you have people around you 24/7, so it's easy to, if you're shy or introverted, to, for example, start practicing in class to when the teacher asks something to say, I want to answer.
Dare yourself. Take the challenge. Yeah.
There are like lots of opportunities to be social.
And it's actually something that Victor has been writing a lot about in his blog. So we'll share some links to blogs where you actually go through what you've done for yourself in that process. Mm-hmm. Okay, Cameron, let's go to you. Any tips or suggestions you have to anyone who is struggling now of this personal or who is finding they have a lot with them from?
Okay, I'm here. It was just cutting out a little bit. Yeah, so I have two kind of points I wanted to look at there. One is kind of specific, the other one's a more general point. The specific one that I found that really supported me was, particularly if you're having trouble when you're reading, is to the moment that you find yourself drifting off, or you find something that you find yourself reading and it's not making sense, go back to where you saw that you lost either focus or where things started not making sense. Don't allow yourself to just keep going, because a lot of times what happens within that experience is that you just become more and more confused and more frustrated. And the fact is there's usually a word or something that you missed or that perhaps wasn't defined very effectively. So you can go back and look at, okay, what was the word that when I read it, I didn't really know what it meant, but I kind of just skipped over it and didn't worry about it. Go back and identify those things. That was very critical for me in terms of being able to maintain my focus and understanding when I'm reading something and not just sitting there and wasting time. The other more general thing that I was looking at that supported me and also a lot of the students that I've worked with over the years, you know, I remember giving the same objection when I was in school, and I've heard it from other students, which is, you know, why do I have to learn chemistry, or why do I have to learn algebra, or whatever it is? I'm never going to use this. And the fact is, you know, you may never use chemistry. You may never use it, any particular subject that you're learning. But what supported me was to realize that it's not about necessarily that information, because especially understanding that the school system is structured the way it is, and all those things that we were talking about, Victor, for example, in terms of the starting point of the school system and what it's really meant for. Realizing that there's a lot of information in school that you maybe won't be using later in life, but utilizing it as an opportunity to say, you know what, in life there will be things that perhaps I have no interest in, but they may be beneficial for me to know at some point, or if I'm trying to solve some problem, or if something comes up in my job where I may have to study something that doesn't particularly catch my interest. So those subjects and things that come up in school are opportunities for you to develop and expand your ability to learn, regardless of the information, regardless of your particular interest in it. And you may find in doing that just the act of learning becomes more enjoyable and more fulfilling within yourself, because it's not dependent upon what you're learning, but more about your starting point within that. So that was very critical for me. I just wanted to share that.
That's an excellent point, Cameron, because I was one of those people who said, in a moment of judgment, which was actually hiding the fact that I felt inferior to the information because I had trouble understanding it, where I said, for example, with chemistry, I'm not going to need it, and now I really regret that I didn't, because I realized, things like chemistry and physics, it regards our entire existence, our entire planet, our entire world. It's like the basic foundations of what we're all made up of, and it can come up in like little small things with, for example, can you mix water and oil in a salad or whatever? That there are some fundamental things that I definitely find that I'm lacking because I opted out due to actually thinking that I couldn't do it back then. And so I'm definitely making that a commitment for myself as an adult. But if you do have the opportunity to do it now as a teenager or as a young adult, I would definitely agree with Cameron that it's a cool thing to do, and you never know. You never know. So Cameron and Victor, thank you guys so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And we will be back next week to discuss more about education. And we're also doing a movie hangout tomorrow. And right now, it completely slipped my mind which movie it is. Do you remember? No. So.
Yeah, Fury.
Right. We're actually. This is super embarrassing because we're actually on that movie hangout. Cameron, did you watch Fury yet?
No, I haven't seen it.
Okay, so it is a very interesting movie about war, and I'm normally not super excited about war movies, but this one actually catched my eye, and it is as much about war as it is about socialization, and specifically also in this context the process of becoming a man. So I can definitely recommend watching it and also tuning in for a movie hangout tomorrow. It is at Friday, and you can find all the details on our Facebook page, DIP Lite on Facebook. All the information will be here in the description of this video once it's uploaded. All right, thank you guys for being here, and see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.